April 4, 2025. A Thursday morning that started like any other in Ravenscroft, West Virginia. The sun barely broke through the fog that clung to the hills, and at Miles Auto Repair on Main Street, the first customers were already pulling in. Ethan Miles, the town's trusted mechanic for nearly 3 decades, was under the hood of a Ford pickup, grease on his hands, a smile ready for whoever walked through the door. Then the black SUVs arrived. FBI agents in tactical vests stepped out, followed by state police cruisers blocking both ends of the street. Customers froze. Tools clattered to the concrete floor. Ethan looked up, confusion spreading across his face, until the lead agent called his name. "Ethan Miles, you're under arrest for the murder of Laura Beckett." The words hit the air like a gunshot. Handcuffs snapped around his wrists in front of a crowd that had known him since he was a kid. The man who coached Little League. The man who fixed brakes for free when single mothers couldn't afford the bill. The man who'd lived an ordinary, quiet life in the same town for 50 years. He was a killer. And he'd been hiding in plain sight since 1996. 29 years earlier, on a stormy June night, 19-year-old Laura Beckett drove down Coal Ridge Road and disappeared. Her car was found abandoned the next morning, door open, purse inside, keys missing. Muddy footprints led into the forest, but Laura was gone. Vanished. The case went cold, the town moved on, and the truth buried itself deeper with every passing year. But DNA doesn't forget. In 2024, investigators reopened Laura's case using technology that didn't exist in 1996. A single strand of hair found in her car was tested again. When the results came back, they pointed to one man, Ethan Miles. The same mechanic who'd been questioned back then and cleared. The same man who'd spent 3 decades building a family, a business, and a reputation while Laura's body rotted in the woods. This is the story of how a small town's most trusted neighbor became its most dangerous secret. A case that proves monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes, they look like the guy who waves at you every morning. Sometimes, they wear wedding rings and sponsor church fundraisers. And sometimes, they get away with murder for almost 30 years. If you're ready to hear how justice finally caught up with a killer who thought he was untouchable, stay with me. This case will challenge everything you think you know about the people around you. And if this story already has your attention, hit that subscribe button right now, because we're about to go deep into one of West Virginia's most haunting cold cases. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single detail. Let's go back to where it all began. June 17, 1996. The night Laura Beckett's life was stolen, and the night Ethan Miles thought he'd gotten away with it. Laura Marie Beckett wasn't supposed to be in Ravenscroft that summer. She had plans, big ones. At 19, she was finishing her freshman year at Marshall University, studying journalism with a focus that impressed even her toughest professors. She wanted to tell stories that mattered. Stories that exposed corruption, gave voice to the forgotten, and held power accountable. Her parents, Dean and Margaret Beckett, had raised her in a modest 2-story house on Elm Street, right in the heart of town. Dean worked maintenance at the now-closed Blackwood mine. Margaret taught 3rd grade at Ravenscroft Elementary. They were proud of their daughter, the first in their family to go to college, the first to dream beyond the coal dust and economic decline that had swallowed so many futures in their corner of West Virginia. Laura had her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. She was the kind of person who remembered your birthday, who'd stay late to help a friend study, who'd argue passionately about things she believed in. Her friends described her as fearless. Maybe too fearless. That spring semester, she'd written an investigative piece for her journalism class about unsafe working conditions at a local mine. It wasn't just an academic exercise. Laura had grown up watching her father come home exhausted, coughing black phlegm into the sink. She'd heard the stories of men who'd died in collapses that could have been prevented. She knew the mine owners cut corners to save money while workers risked their lives every single day. Her article named names. It cited safety violations. It included interviews with miners who were terrified to speak on the record but trusted Laura enough to tell the truth. Her professor gave her an A and told her it was publishable. Laura planned to submit it to the local paper, the Ravenscroft Gazette, when she returned home for the summer. She had no idea that decision would get her killed. When Laura came back to Ravenscroft in early June, she picked up shifts at Betty's Diner on Route 9, the same place she'd worked since high school. It was a small operation, vinyl booths, a jukebox that only played country, and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since morning no matter what time you ordered it. But the tips were decent, and Laura liked the regularity. She knew most of the customers by name. Except for one. Her best friend, Casey Winters, later told investigators that Laura had mentioned someone new. A man who'd started showing up at the diner a few weeks before she disappeared. He'd sit in the corner booth, order nothing but black coffee, and stare. Not in an obvious way. Just enough to make Laura uncomfortable. She'd asked Casey if she was being paranoid. Maybe he's just shy, Casey had said. Laura wasn't convinced. She'd written about it in her journal, a line that private investigator Ruth Garrison would find months later: "He's watching me. I don't know why, but I feel it every time he's here." That man was never identified. But looking back now, investigators believe Laura's instincts were right. Someone was watching her. Someone who knew what she was planning to publish. Someone who had everything to lose if her article went public. By mid-June, Laura had finalized her piece and scheduled a meeting with the editor of the Gazette for June 20th. She was excited. Nervous, but excited. This was her shot to make a real impact, to prove that journalism could change things even in a town as small as Ravenscroft. On the evening of June 17th, she went to a party at a friend's cabin near Summit Lake. It was a casual gathering, about a dozen people, mostly locals her age, celebrating the start of summer. Laura brought homemade brownies and spent most of the night talking about her upcoming internship and the article she was so proud of. Around 10:30, she told everyone she had to leave. Her shift at the diner started at 6 in the morning, and she wanted to get some sleep. A few people tried to convince her to stay longer, but Laura was responsible like that. She grabbed her keys, hugged her friends goodbye, and walked out to her red 1989 Honda Civic parked near the edge of the gravel lot. She waved one last time before pulling onto the road. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. What Laura didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that someone had followed her from the party. Someone who'd been waiting for the right moment. Someone who couldn't let her article see the light of day. The drive from Summit Lake to Laura's house should have taken 12 minutes. Coal Ridge Road was a winding two-lane stretch bordered by thick forest on both sides. No street lights. No houses. Just trees and darkness and the occasional deer crossing. It was the kind of road where you didn't want your car to break down at night. But that's exactly what happened. Or at least, that's what Laura was led to believe. Somewhere along Coal Ridge Road, her rear tire started losing air. She pulled over, flashlight in hand, trying to figure out what to do. That's when headlights appeared behind her. A pickup truck. And a man she recognized. She thought he was there to help. She was wrong. June 18, 1996. 6 o'clock in the morning. Betty's Diner was already filling with the early crowd: truckers, construction workers, retirees who had nowhere else to be. The coffee pot was on, the grill was hot, and the owner, Betty Harmon, was waiting for her most reliable waitress to walk through the door. Laura Beckett never showed up. Betty figured maybe Laura overslept. It happened sometimes. She called the Beckett house around 6:30. Margaret answered, groggy and confused. "Laura's not here," she said. "She didn't come home last night." That's when the panic started. Dean Beckett threw on his clothes and drove straight to Summit Lake, thinking maybe Laura had stayed over at a friend's cabin. But when he got there, the place was empty. He called Casey Winters. She hadn't heard from Laura since she left the party. He called every friend he could think of. No one had seen her. By 9 in the morning, Dean was at the Greene County Sheriff's Department filing a missing persons report. Deputy Travis Holland took down the details, but he didn't seem too concerned at first. 19-year-old college student doesn't come home after a party? It wasn't uncommon. Maybe she met someone. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she'd show up by noon with an explanation. But Dean knew his daughter. Laura wasn't reckless. She didn't disappear without a word. Something was wrong. It was just after 10:30 when a road maintenance worker named Eugene Potts called the sheriff's office. He'd been driving along Coal Ridge Road on his way to inspect a guardrail when he spotted a car pulled off to the side, a red Honda Civic with the driver's side door hanging open. He stopped to check if someone needed help. The car was empty. Engine cold. No one around. Eugene radioed it in. When deputies arrived and ran the plates, their stomachs dropped. The car belonged to Laura Beckett. Dean and Margaret got the call just before noon. Their daughter's car had been found abandoned on one of the loneliest stretches of road in the county. No sign of Laura. No indication where she'd gone or what had happened. When Detective Carl Dunbar arrived at the scene, he knew immediately this wasn't a case of a teenager running off. The car told a story, and it wasn't a good one. The driver's door was wide open, like Laura had gotten out in a hurry, or been forced out. Her purse was still on the passenger seat. Wallet inside. $32 in cash. Her student ID from Marshall University staring up at him like a ghost. But her keys were gone. Completely missing. Dunbar crouched near the rear tire. It was flat, but not from a blowout. The air had leaked slowly, probably over the course of a mile or two. Whoever had been driving would have felt it, pulled over, and realized they had a problem. Then he saw the footprints. The ground near the car was still damp from the storm the night before. There were two sets of prints leading away from the vehicle toward the tree line. One set was small, women's sneakers, size 7 or 8. Those had to be Laura's. But the second set was much larger. Men's boots, size 11, maybe 12. Heavy treads. Deep impressions, like whoever wore them was carrying extra weight. Or chasing someone. Dunbar followed the tracks into the forest for about 50 yards before they disappeared into a creek bed. The water had washed away everything after that. No clothing. No blood. No weapon. No body. Just thick woods that stretched for miles in every direction. Search teams were called in by early afternoon. Volunteers from town, state police, cadaver dogs, everyone who could help. They combed through the forest around Coal Ridge Road for 3 straight days. They checked abandoned cabins, old mining tunnels, ravines where a body could have been hidden. They dragged Summit Lake. They flew helicopters overhead with thermal imaging. Nothing. Laura Beckett had walked into those woods and ceased to exist. By the 3rd day, the media had picked up the story. Local news stations ran her photo, smiling, full of life, brown curls framing her face. Margaret and Dean appeared on camera, their voices shaking, begging anyone with information to come forward. "Please," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "If you know anything, anything at all, call the police. We just want our daughter back." The tip line lit up. People called in with sightings, theories, accusations. Someone claimed they saw Laura hitchhiking near the state line. Another said she'd been spotted at a gas station in Ohio. A psychic from 2 counties over insisted Laura's spirit was trying to communicate and that her body was near water. None of it led anywhere. Detective Dunbar worked the case like his life depended on it. He interviewed everyone who'd been at the party that night. He pulled phone records. He checked Laura's journal, her class notes, her emails. He looked for enemies, ex-boyfriends, anyone with a motive to hurt her. One name kept coming up. Ethan Miles. Ethan was 23 at the time, a local mechanic who'd grown up in Ravenscroft. He'd been at the cabin party that night, though he wasn't particularly close with Laura. A few people mentioned he'd left around the same time she did, maybe 10 minutes after. Maybe less. When Dunbar brought him in for questioning, Ethan was calm. Cooperative. He said he'd left early because his truck was acting up, and he didn't want to get stranded. He'd driven straight home, fixed a flat tire on Coal Ridge Road, and gone to bed. Dunbar asked if he'd seen Laura on the road. Ethan said no. Just him and the darkness. They checked his alibi. His truck had fresh tire marks consistent with a roadside repair. There was a jack and a spare in the bed of his pickup. No blood. No scratches on him. No defensive wounds. His story held up. Ethan Miles walked out of the sheriff's office a free man. And Laura's case went cold. Weeks turned into months. The search parties stopped. The news cameras left. The tip line went quiet. Dean and Margaret hired Ruth Garrison, the private investigator, but even she couldn't find anything solid. Just that haunting line in Laura's journal about the man who kept watching her at the diner. By fall, the town had started to move on. People whispered theories at the grocery store, at church, at Friday night football games. Some thought Laura had run away. Others believed she'd been taken by someone passing through, a drifter, a trucker, someone who'd never be caught. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. Laura Beckett was dead. And whoever killed her was still out there. If you're still with me, drop a comment right now and let me know where you're watching from. Seriously. I need to know this story is reaching people who care about justice. And if this case has you as gripped as it has me, smash that like button. Because what comes next, what investigators discovered nearly 30 years later, will make your blood run cold. Don't go anywhere. Detective Carl Dunbar had been with the Greene County Sheriff's Department for 17 years by the time Laura Beckett disappeared. He'd worked everything from bar fights to domestic disputes to the occasional meth bust, but a missing college student? That was different. That was the kind of case that kept you up at night, the kind that followed you home and sat across from you at the dinner table. Dunbar wasn't flashy. He didn't bark orders or make dramatic speeches. He was methodical, patient, the kind of investigator who believed every case had an answer if you looked hard enough. He carried a worn leather notebook everywhere he went, filling page after page with observations, timelines, questions that needed answering. Laura's case consumed him. He started by reconstructing her last 24 hours. Who did she talk to? Where did she go? What was her state of mind? He interviewed her parents, her co-workers at the diner, her professors at Marshall University. Everyone painted the same picture. Laura was focused, ambitious, not the type to just vanish without a reason. Then there was the party. Dunbar spoke to everyone who'd been at the cabin that night. Most of them were locals, young people Laura had grown up with. They all remembered her being in good spirits, talking about her internship, excited about the future. No arguments. No strange behavior. She left around 10:30, just like she said she would. But one detail stood out. A guy named Marcus Lowe mentioned that Ethan Miles had been there. Marcus didn't think much of it at the time. Ethan knew some of the guys at the party through his auto shop. He'd shown up late, stayed maybe 45 minutes, mostly kept to himself. And then he left. Right around the same time Laura did. Dunbar pulled Ethan's background. 23 years old. Born and raised in Ravenscroft. No criminal record. Worked at his uncle's garage since he was 16, eventually took over the business when his uncle retired. Married his high school sweetheart, Angela, 2 years prior. By all accounts, he was a decent guy. Hardworking. Quiet. The kind of person you'd trust to fix your car and not overcharge you. But Dunbar had learned long ago that decent guys could do terrible things. When Ethan came in for questioning, he seemed genuinely surprised to be there. He sat across from Dunbar in the small interrogation room, hands folded on the table, no lawyer present. He didn't think he needed one. Dunbar asked him about the party. Ethan confirmed he'd been there but said he didn't really talk to Laura. He knew who she was, everyone in Ravenscroft knew everyone, but they weren't friends. "Why'd you leave when you did?" Dunbar asked. Ethan shrugged. Truck was making a weird noise. Didn't want to risk breaking down on the way home. "Did you see Laura leave?" "Not really. I mean, I saw her head out, but I left a few minutes after. Took Coal Ridge Road home like I always do." Dunbar leaned forward. "You take Coal Ridge Road every night?" "Yeah. It's the fastest route to my place." "Did you see her car on the road?" Ethan paused. Just for a second. Then shook his head. "No. Didn't see her." "But you stopped on Coal Ridge Road that night, didn't you?" "Yeah. Had a flat tire. Fixed it on the side of the road and went home." Dunbar made a note. "What time was that?" "I don't know. Maybe 11? 11:30? Anyone see you?" "No. Middle of the night. No one else on the road." Dunbar pushed a photo of Laura across the table. "She's missing. Her car was found on Coal Ridge Road. Same road you were on. Same night. Same time. And you didn't see her?" Ethan looked at the photo, then back at Dunbar. His expression didn't change. "I didn't see her, detective. I wish I had. Maybe I could have helped." Dunbar studied him. No sweat on his forehead. No fidgeting. No cracks in his story. Either Ethan Miles was telling the truth, or he was very, very good at lying. They checked his truck. No blood. No hair. No fibers that matched Laura's clothing. The spare tire was in the back, recently used. There were grease stains on his hands, dirt under his nails, nothing unusual for a mechanic. His wife confirmed he came home that night around midnight, tired and quiet like always. Dunbar had nothing solid. Just suspicion. And suspicion didn't hold up in court. But there were others to investigate. Laura's ex-boyfriend from high school, Tommy Rourke, had moved to Pennsylvania the year before, but Dunbar tracked him down anyway. Tommy had an alibi, he was working a night shift at a warehouse 200 miles away. Security footage confirmed it. Then there was a drifter named Jacob Finch who'd been spotted near Ravenscroft around the time Laura disappeared. Dunbar brought him in, but Finch had been in a holding cell in the next county over on a drunk and disorderly charge the night Laura vanished. Another dead end. Dunbar kept coming back to that line in Laura's journal. The man at the diner who kept watching her. Ruth Garrison, the private investigator the Becketts hired, became obsessed with it. She interviewed every regular at Betty's diner, pulled credit card receipts, tried to match faces to descriptions. But no one could identify the man Laura was talking about. It was like he'd been a ghost. Months passed. The case grew colder. Tips dried up. The media moved on to other stories. Dean and Margaret Beckett stopped appearing on television, their hope replaced by a hollow grief that never quite went away. Detective Dunbar kept the file on his desk. Every few months, he'd pull it out and read through his notes again, hoping something new would jump out at him. It never did. By 1998, the case was officially cold. Dunbar still thought about it, but there was nothing left to investigate. No new evidence. No new leads. Just a missing girl and a town full of people who'd learned to live with unanswered questions. Ethan Miles went back to running his shop. He and Angela had their first child in 1999. Then a second in 2002. He coached his son's Little League team, sponsored local fundraisers, became one of those pillars of the community people pointed to when they talked about what made Ravenscroft special. No one suspected him. Why would they? He'd been cleared. His alibi checked out. He was just a guy who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, another name in a case file that would never be solved. Or so everyone thought. Time has a way of burying things. Not just bodies, but memories. Questions. Guilt. By the early 2000s, Ravenscroft was changing. The coal industry that had sustained the town for generations was collapsing. Blackwood Mine shut down in 2003, taking hundreds of jobs with it. Families packed up and left, chasing work in other states. Main Street businesses closed one by one. The high school graduation classes got smaller every year. The town was dying, and with it, the memory of Laura Beckett. Dean and Margaret couldn't bear to stay. In 2004, they sold their house on Elm Street and moved to North Carolina to be closer to Margaret's sister. Before they left, they held a small memorial service at the church where Laura had been baptized. Maybe 20 people showed up. It was quiet. Somber. A goodbye to a girl who'd never gotten one. Detective Carl Dunbar retired in 2010. He was 63, tired, and haunted by the cases he couldn't solve. Laura's was at the top of that list. On his last day at the department, he handed her file to a younger detective named Jennifer Moss and said, "Don't let her be forgotten." But she was. Not intentionally. Not cruelly. It's just what happens when years turn into decades and the people who remember start to disappear. Betty's Diner changed ownership in 2012. The new owners renovated, painted over the old booths, got rid of the jukebox. The regulars who used to sit there and talk about Laura were either gone or too old to care. Occasionally, on a stormy night when the rain hammered the tin roof and the lights flickered, someone would mention her name. That girl who disappeared back in the 90s. What was her name again? And someone else would answer, Laura something. Beckett, I think. Then the conversation would move on. Ethan Miles, meanwhile, had become one of Ravenscroft's most respected residents. His auto shop was still the go-to place for repairs. He never overcharged. If someone couldn't afford the work, he'd cut them a deal or let them pay overtime. He was patient with the elderly customers who brought their cars in for oil changes and stayed to talk for an hour about nothing in particular. His son, Jacob, was a star pitcher on the high school baseball team. His daughter, Emma, was a straight-A student who volunteered at the library. Angela still sang in the church choir every Sunday. To anyone looking from the outside, the Miles family was the definition of small-town success. No one knew that Ethan woke up some nights in a cold sweat, replaying June 17, 1996, in his head. No one knew he avoided Coal Ridge Road whenever possible, taking the long way home even when it added 20 minutes to his drive. No one knew he'd burned every piece of clothing he wore that night, buried Laura's notebook in a place he swore he'd never return to, and convinced himself that if he just kept living a normal life, the past would stay buried. For nearly 3 decades, it did. But in 2019, something shifted. West Virginia launched a cold case task force, a joint effort between state police and the FBI to revisit unsolved murders and disappearances using modern technology. Advances in DNA analysis, digital forensics, and investigative techniques meant that cases once considered hopeless could be reopened with a real chance of solving them. Laura Beckett's case was one of the first selected. Detective Jennifer Moss, who'd inherited the file from Dunbar years earlier, volunteered to lead the reinvestigation. She'd read through Dunbar's notes dozens of times. She knew every detail, every dead end, every name. And she believed, deep down, that the answer had been there all along. They just hadn't had the tools to find it. The task force pulled the original evidence from storage. Laura's car had been processed in 1996, but the technology back then was limited. Hair samples, fingerprints, fibers, all of it had been catalogued but never fully analyzed with modern methods. In 2024, Moss sent the evidence to a lab specializing in forensic DNA testing. Specifically, a single strand of hair that had been found on the driver's seat of Laura's Honda Civic. Back in 1996, they'd tested it but couldn't extract enough genetic material for a match. Now, with advanced techniques, they could. 3 months later, the results came back. The DNA profile was clear. Viable. And it matched someone in the National Criminal Database. When Moss saw the name on the report, she had to read it twice. Then a third time. She called the lab to confirm they hadn't made a mistake. They hadn't. The hair belonged to Ethan Miles. Moss sat in her office for a long time, staring at the file. Ethan Miles had been questioned in 1996. He'd been cleared. His alibi had checked out. For 28 years, he'd lived a normal life in the same town where Laura disappeared. And now, his DNA was inside her car. The FBI joined the investigation immediately. They couldn't arrest Ethan yet, not without more evidence. DNA in a car wasn't proof of murder. Ethan could claim he'd been in Laura's car at some point for an innocent reason. They needed more. So they watched him. For 3 months, federal agents conducted surveillance. They tracked his movements, monitored his phone, followed him to work and back home. They were looking for anything, a slip-up, a confession to a friend, a return to the burial site. But Ethan was careful. He lived his life the same way he always had. Predictable. Routine. Invisible. In March 2025, agents obtained a warrant for a fresh DNA sample. They swabbed his cheek during what Ethan thought was a routine traffic stop. When the results came back, there was no doubt. Perfect match. On April 4, 2025, they made their move. April 4, 2025. The day Ravenscroft learned that the man they'd trusted for 3 decades was a liar. When the FBI arrested Ethan Miles at his auto shop that morning, the entire town seemed to stop breathing. Word spread faster than wildfire. By noon, everyone knew. The mechanic who'd fixed their brakes. The coach who'd taught their kids how to throw a curveball. The neighbor who'd shoveled their driveways in winter. He was being charged with Laura Beckett's murder. The disbelief was suffocating. Angela Miles collapsed when agents knocked on her door to inform her of the arrest. Her son, Jacob, who was weeks away from graduating from the State Police Academy, couldn't process it. His father? A killer? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. But the evidence didn't care about feelings. Detective Jennifer Moss held a press conference that afternoon. She stood behind a podium with the FBI's lead investigator, Agent Sarah Brennan, and explained what the public needed to know without compromising the case. In 1996, Laura Beckett disappeared after leaving a party near Summit Lake. Her car was found abandoned on Coal Ridge Road. For nearly 30 years, this case remained unsolved. But thanks to advances in forensic technology, we were able to retest evidence collected from Laura's vehicle. That evidence led us to Ethan Miles. Reporters shouted questions. Moss raised her hand for silence. We are confident in the integrity of this investigation. DNA evidence recovered from Laura's car matches Mr. Miles. We are currently working to locate her remains and build a complete picture of what happened that night. The press conference lasted 15 minutes. By the time it ended, the story had gone national. Cable news picked it up. True crime podcasts started covering it. Social media exploded with theories, outrage, and people claiming they'd always known something was off about Ethan. They hadn't. No one had. Back at the Greene County Sheriff's Department, Ethan sat in an interrogation room for the first time in 29 years. This time, things were different. This time, he had a lawyer. This time, the walls were closing in. Agent Brennan and Detective Moss took the lead. They laid out the evidence calmly, methodically. The DNA. The timeline. The fact that he'd been on Coal Ridge Road the same night Laura disappeared. The fact that his story from 1996 no longer held up under scrutiny. Ethan said nothing. His lawyer advised him to stay silent. But silence has a weight to it. And after 6 hours of sitting in that room, staring at photos of Laura, her smile, her life, everything he'd taken from her, Ethan cracked. Not all at once. It started with a tremor in his hands. Then his voice, barely a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen." His lawyer tried to stop him. Ethan ignored him. "I didn't mean for any of it." Moss leaned forward. "Tell us what happened, Ethan." And he did. The confession came in broken pieces, but the story was clear. Laura had been writing an article about unsafe conditions at a mine, Blackwood Mine, the same one Ethan's older brother managed. The same mine that employed half the town, including people Ethan had known his entire life. If that article went public, it would destroy reputations. It would cost jobs. It would ruin his brother. Ethan had heard about the article through a mutual friend who'd seen Laura working on it at the university library. He didn't think much of it at first. But then Laura came into the diner one afternoon and mentioned to a coworker that she was planning to submit it to the Gazette. She was proud. Excited. Ethan panicked. He started showing up at the diner more often, watching her, trying to figure out how serious she was. That's when Laura noticed him. That's when she wrote in her journal about the man who kept staring. On the night of June 17, Ethan went to the party at Summit Lake. Not because he was invited, but because he knew Laura would be there. He waited. When she left, he followed. He didn't plan to kill her. At least, that's what he told himself. Laura's tire had been losing air slowly, a slow leak, nothing dramatic. She pulled over on Coal Ridge Road to check it. That's when Ethan pulled up behind her in his truck. He got out, offered to help. Laura hesitated. She recognized him from the diner, and something about the way he looked at her made her uncomfortable. But it was late. The road was empty. And Ethan seemed harmless. She let him approach. That's when he brought it up. The article. He asked her, politely at first, to reconsider publishing it. He told her it would hurt people. Good people. His brother. Families who depended on the mine. Laura refused. She told him the truth mattered more than protecting people who were breaking the law. Ethan's tone shifted. He became aggressive. Demanding. He grabbed her arm. Laura pulled away and hit him across the face with the flashlight she'd been holding. She ran toward the tree line, screaming for help that would never come. Ethan chased her. He caught up to her about 50 yards into the woods. There was a struggle. Laura fought back harder than he expected. She scratched his face, kicked him, tried to get away. But Ethan was bigger. Stronger. Desperate. He shoved her. She fell backward, her head striking a large rock embedded in the ground. The sound, he said he'd never forget the sound. A dull, sickening crack. She stopped moving. Ethan stood over her, breathing hard, blood running down his cheek from where she'd scratched him. He checked for a pulse. There wasn't one. Laura Beckett was dead. Panic set in. He couldn't call for help. He couldn't explain what happened. So he made a choice. He dragged her body deeper into the woods, to a place near Moss Hollow Creek where the ground was soft. He buried her beneath an old sycamore tree, using his bare hands and a shovel he kept in his truck for emergencies. He went back to her car, wiped down anything he might have touched, and took her keys so no one would think she'd just walked away. He burned his clothes in a barrel behind his house. He scrubbed the blood off his face and told Angela he'd gotten into a minor scuffle at the party. And then he went to bed. The next morning, when deputies found Laura's car, Ethan played the role of concerned citizen. When Detective Dunbar questioned him, he stuck to his story. Flat tire. Didn't see her. Went home. He thought he'd gotten away with it. For 29 years, he was right. By the time Ethan finished his confession, Moss and Brennan had enough to charge him. But they needed one more thing. They needed Laura's body. Ethan told them where to look. Moss Hollow Creek. The sycamore tree with the twisted roots. A forensic team was dispatched immediately. It took them 2 days of digging, but they found her. Partial skeletal remains. A silver ring with the initials, LB, engraved on the inside. A denim jacket that matched the description of what Laura had been wearing that night. It was her. Can you imagine? 30 years of wondering, and the answer was buried less than 10 miles from where she disappeared. If this case has you shaken, you're not alone. Comment below, would you have ever suspected someone like Ethan? And if you're still watching right now, type "still watching" in the comments. Let me know you're here. Hit that like button. Because this story is about to reach its conclusion, and you need to see how justice finally caught up. The interrogation room felt smaller with every passing minute. Ethan Miles sat hunched over the metal table, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Across from him, Detective Jennifer Moss and Agent Sarah Brennan waited. They'd heard the outline. Now they needed the details. Every horrifying detail. Moss slid a photograph across the table. Laura Beckett, smiling in her Marshall University sweatshirt. 19 years old. A lifetime ahead of her. Walk us through that night, Moss said. From the beginning. Ethan stared at the photo. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he started talking. He'd been thinking about Laura's article for weeks. His brother, Marcus Miles, managed operations at Blackwood Mine. Marcus wasn't a bad person, he was just trying to keep the mine profitable in an industry that was already dying. Safety upgrades cost money. Inspections slowed production. Marcus cut corners because he thought he had to. Because he thought no one would notice. But Laura noticed. She'd interviewed miners off the record. She'd documented violations. She had dates, names, incidents where workers had been injured because equipment wasn't maintained properly. If her article went public, Marcus would lose his job. The mine owners would face lawsuits. The whole operation could shut down. Ethan couldn't let that happen. He'd gone to the party at Summit Lake specifically to watch Laura. He needed to know if she was serious about publishing. When he overheard her talking to friends about meeting with the newspaper editor on June 20th, his stomach dropped. She was really going to do it. When Laura left the party around 10:30, Ethan waited a few minutes and then followed. He stayed far enough back that she wouldn't notice his headlights. Coal Ridge Road was dark, winding, isolated. Perfect for what he needed to do. About 3 miles from her house, he saw her brake lights come on. Her car slowed, then pulled to the shoulder. Ethan's heart was racing. This was his chance. He pulled up behind her and got out. Laura was standing by her rear tire, flashlight in hand, inspecting the slow leak. When she saw him, her expression shifted. Not quite fear, but caution. You okay? Ethan called out, keeping his voice friendly. Laura hesitated. Tires going flat. I think I can make it home if I drive slow. I can change it for you. Won't take long. She shook her head. I'm fine. Really? Ethan stepped closer. Laura, I need to talk to you about something. That's when her guard went up. She gripped the flashlight tighter. About what? Your article. The one about the mine. Her face hardened. How do you know about that? People talk. Look, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but you don't understand what you're messing with. That mine employs a lot of people. Good people. If it shuts down, this whole town suffers. Laura took a step back. So I should just ignore the fact that workers are getting hurt? That safety regulations are being violated? I'm asking you to think about the bigger picture. I am thinking about the bigger picture. That's why I'm writing it. Ethan's frustration boiled over. My brother could lose everything because of you. Then maybe your brother shouldn't be breaking the law. That's when he grabbed her arm. Not hard at first, just enough to stop her from walking away. But Laura reacted instantly. She jerked free and swung the flashlight, catching him across the cheek. Pain exploded through his face. Blood ran warm down his skin. Laura bolted. She ran toward the tree line, her sneakers crunching on gravel and then muffled by the forest floor. Ethan stood there for a second, stunned, his hand pressed to his bleeding face. Then instinct took over. He chased her. The forest was thick, branches clawing at his arms, roots trying to trip him. But he was faster. Stronger. He caught up to her near a cluster of oak trees, grabbing her jacket and yanking her backward. Laura screamed. She fought like hell. Scratching, kicking, biting. She got him again, nails raking across his neck, drawing more blood. Ethan shoved her hard, trying to get her to stop, to just stop fighting. She stumbled backward. Her foot caught on an exposed root. She fell. And her head struck the rock. Ethan froze. The sound was something he'd replayed in his nightmares for 3 decades. A dull, wet crack that seemed too loud for the quiet forest. Laura's body went limp. She crumpled to the ground, her eyes open but vacant. He dropped to his knees beside her, shaking her shoulder. Laura. Laura, come on. Get up. Nothing. He checked her pulse. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely find her wrist. When he finally did, there was nothing. No heartbeat. No breath. She was gone. Ethan sat back on his heels, staring at her body. His mind raced. Call the police? Tell them it was an accident? But how would he explain following her, grabbing her, chasing her into the woods? Who would believe it wasn't intentional? He made his decision. He ran back to his truck and grabbed the shovel he kept in the bed for emergencies. Then he returned to Laura's body and dragged her deeper into the forest, toward Moss Hollow Creek. The ground there was softer, easier to dig. He worked in the darkness, sweat pouring down his face, his hands blistering from the shovel handle. It took him 2 hours to dig a grave deep enough. When he was done, he lowered Laura into the ground. He stood over her for a moment, looking at her face one last time. Then he covered her. Dirt. Leaves. Branches. Anything to hide what he'd done. He found her notebook near where she'd fallen, the one with all her research for the article. He took it with him and burned it the next day along with his clothes. He scrubbed the blood off his face and neck, told Angela he'd gotten into a scuffle at the party over nothing important. The next morning, when deputies found Laura's car, Ethan played his part. Concerned. Cooperative. Confused. Detective Dunbar had questioned him, and Ethan had lied to his face. He'd watched the search parties comb through the woods, knowing they'd never find her. He'd attended the memorial service, standing in the back, watching Dean and Margaret Beckett cry for a daughter he'd killed. And then he'd gone back to his life. He married Angela. Had kids. Coached baseball. Fixed cars. Became the person everyone trusted. And every day, he carried the weight of what he'd done, buried so deep he almost convinced himself it had happened to someone else. Until the DNA test brought it all back. By the time Ethan finished talking, Moss and Brennan had everything they needed. The motive. The timeline. The location of the body. The confession was recorded, transcribed, signed. Ethan Miles was done running. When forensic teams recovered Laura's remains from beneath the sycamore tree at Moss Hollow Creek, they found more than just bones. They found the silver ring her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday. They found scraps of the denim jacket she'd been wearing. They found proof that Ethan had been telling the truth, at least about where he'd buried her. The Beckett family was notified immediately. Dean was 81 now. Margaret had passed away in 2019, never knowing what happened to her daughter. When Dean heard the news, he wept. Not just from grief, but from relief. After 29 years, Laura could finally come home. The arrest shook Ravenscroft to its core. Angela Miles filed for divorce within a week. Jacob withdrew from the police academy. Emma moved out of state, too ashamed to face the town that had once adored her father. Ethan's auto shop closed. The building sat empty, windows dark, a "for sale" sign planted in the gravel lot where he'd been arrested. And the town learned a lesson it would never forget. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the guy next door. September 15, 2025. The Greene County Courthouse was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled. News cameras lined the steps outside. Reporters from national outlets had set up camp across the street. The trial of Ethan Miles had become one of the most closely watched cases in West Virginia history. Dean Beckett sat in the front row, flanked by Laura's childhood friends and relatives who'd traveled from across the country to be there. He wore the same suit he'd worn to Margaret's funeral 6 years earlier. His hands trembled as he clutched a framed photograph of Laura, the one from her high school graduation. Ethan entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked older than his 52 years. His hair had gone completely gray in the 5 months since his arrest. He kept his eyes down, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Catherine Voss, a no-nonsense lawyer with a reputation for handling high-profile cases. She'd spent months preparing, building an airtight case that left no room for doubt. Ethan's defense attorney, Richard Holbrook, faced an impossible task. His client had confessed. The DNA evidence was irrefutable. The body had been recovered exactly where Ethan said it would be. There was no denying what happened. The only strategy left was to argue that it wasn't premeditated murder, that Laura's death was a tragic accident born from a confrontation that spiraled out of control. But the jury would decide if they believed that. Opening statements began on a Tuesday morning. Voss stood before the jury, her voice steady and deliberate. 29 years ago, Laura Beckett was 19 years old. She was a college student with dreams of becoming a journalist. She wanted to tell stories that mattered, stories that held powerful people accountable. On June 17, 1996, she wrote a story that would cost her everything. Ethan Miles made sure of that. Voss laid out the timeline. The article Laura had written. Ethan's fear that it would destroy his brother's career. The party at Summit Lake. The calculated decision to follow Laura when she left. The confrontation on Coal Ridge Road. The chase into the woods. The fatal blow. "This wasn't an accident," Voss said, her eyes locked on the jury. "This was a man who decided that his family's reputation mattered more than a young woman's life. And when he realized what he'd done, he didn't call for help. He didn't confess. He buried her. He lied. And he lived a normal life for 3 decades while Laura's parents spent every single day wondering where their daughter was." She paused, letting the weight of it settle. Ethan Miles had 29 years to do the right thing. He never did. Not until he had no choice. When Holbrook gave his opening statement, he took a different approach. He didn't deny what Ethan had done. He couldn't. Instead, he focused on intent. What happened to Laura Beckett was a tragedy. No one disputes that. But this case is about more than tragedy. It's about what was in Ethan Miles' mind that night. Did he wake up planning to kill someone? No. Did he follow Laura with the intent to harm her? No. He wanted to talk to her. To reason with her. When the conversation became heated and Laura ran, he panicked. He chased her. A struggle ensued. And in a moment of chaos, Laura fell and struck her head. Holbrook looked at the jury, his tone measured. Ethan made terrible decisions afterward. Decisions driven by fear and self-preservation. But this was not premeditated murder. This was a man who made a catastrophic mistake and then compounded it by trying to cover it up. That doesn't make it right. But it does make it second-degree murder, not first. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution called witness after witness. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence, the hair strand found in Laura's car, the skeletal remains recovered from Moss Hollow Creek. Detective Jennifer Moss walked the jury through the investigation, explaining how advances in technology had finally cracked a case that had gone cold decades ago. Laura's friends testified about her passion for journalism, her determination to expose the truth, her excitement about the article she was writing. One of them broke down on the stand, sobbing as she described the last time she saw Laura alive. The defense called character witnesses, people who'd known Ethan for years, who insisted he was a good man who'd made a horrible mistake. His former Little League players. Customers from his auto shop. Even a pastor who'd known him since childhood. But none of it could erase what Ethan had done. The most damaging moment came when the prosecution played the recording of Ethan's confession. The courtroom fell silent as his voice filled the room, describing in chilling detail how he'd chased Laura into the woods, how he'd buried her body, how he'd burned the evidence and lied for nearly 30 years. Dean Beckett closed his eyes and wept. On October 3, 2025, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty. Second-degree murder. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered. Others cried. Ethan showed no reaction. He simply stared at the table in front of him, his face blank. The judge, Harold Preston, scheduled sentencing for the following week. On October 10, 2025, Ethan Miles stood before the court one final time. Judge Preston didn't mince words. "Mr. Miles, you have been found guilty of taking the life of Laura Beckett. For 29 years, you allowed her family to suffer, wondering what happened to their daughter. You attended her memorial service. You lived among the people who mourned her. You built a life while hers ended in a shallow grave. This court finds your actions not only criminal but morally reprehensible." He sentenced Ethan to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 20. As Ethan was led out of the courtroom, he turned to look at Dean Beckett. Their eyes met for just a second. Ethan's lips moved, forming 2 words. "I'm sorry." Dean didn't respond. He simply turned away. Outside the courthouse, Voss held a press conference. Cameras flashed as she spoke. Today, justice was served for Laura Beckett. It took nearly 3 decades, but we never stopped fighting for her. This case is a testament to the power of perseverance, technology, and the dedication of law enforcement officers who refuse to let cold cases stay cold. Dean Beckett stood beside her, his voice shaking as he addressed the media. "My wife didn't live to see this day. She died not knowing what happened to our little girl. But I'm grateful that Laura can finally rest. I'm grateful that the man who took her from us will spend the rest of his life behind bars. And I hope this case reminds everyone that the truth always finds a way." Back in Ravenscroft, the town was divided. Some believed Ethan deserved his sentence. Others felt sympathy for the man they'd known for decades, the man who'd helped them, who'd been a part of their community. Angela Miles gave one interview to a local paper. She was brief, her words carefully chosen. "I loved my husband. I thought I knew him. But I didn't. I will carry that betrayal for the rest of my life. My heart breaks for the Beckett family. They deserved better. Laura deserved better." She never spoke publicly about Ethan again. On a cold November evening, just weeks after the verdict, Ravenscroft plans to hold a candlelight vigil at the town square. Word has spread through conversations at the grocery store, at church, at the diner, people talking to people the old-fashioned way. It's expected to draw hundreds. Former classmates of Laura's. Teachers who remembered her in their classrooms. Coal miners who'd known her father. Young people who've never met Laura but feel compelled to acknowledge what was lost. Dean Beckett has said he will attend. Detective Carl Dunbar, now in his 80s and retired for 15 years, has also indicated he'll be there. Though he didn't solve Laura's case, he initiated the investigation that gave it structure. He's carried her file with him into retirement, pulling it out periodically, wondering if new technology might one day provide answers. That day has come, even if it arrived too late for Margaret to witness it. The vigil represents something larger than remembrance. It's an acknowledgement that Ravenscroft was wrong about Ethan Miles. The town trusted him. Relied on him. Built a mythology around him that obscured the truth. The vigil is a way of confronting that failure, of collectively saying, "We were blind to evil because we didn't want to see it." In the weeks following the trial, news outlets have already begun discussing Laura's legacy. National crime programs have featured her story on television. True crime documentaries are in development. Several production companies have sent representatives to town, hoping to acquire the rights to Laura's story. Dean has been cautious. He doesn't want his daughter's death exploited for entertainment. But he's also recognized that Laura's story has power, not just as a crime narrative, but as a story about journalism, about speaking truth to power, about the cost of holding the powerful accountable. Laura's article about mine safety conditions has resurfaced in newspaper archives and libraries. Journalism professors are discussing assigning it to their students. News outlets are republishing it with context about who Laura was and what happened to her. The article that cost her life is finally reaching the audience she'd always intended it for. Marshall University has announced plans to establish the Laura Beckett Investigative Journalism Scholarship. The university's president released a statement saying, "Laura Beckett embodied the highest ideals of journalism, courage, integrity, and a commitment to truth." This scholarship honors her memory and supports the next generation of journalists who will carry forward her legacy. At the state level, lawmakers have begun discussing cold case legislation, bills designed to provide resources for reopening unsolved cases using modern forensic technology. The bills haven't passed yet, but advocates are using Laura's case as their primary example of why this funding matters. "If we'd had these resources in 1996, one legislator said during a committee hearing, we might have solved this case decades ago instead of letting a killer live free for nearly 30 years. Detective Jennifer Moss has become something of a local celebrity. News outlets are calling her the detective who finally brought justice to a cold case that had stumped law enforcement for nearly 3 decades. There's talk of her being promoted to lieutenant, of potentially establishing a dedicated cold case unit within the Greene County Sheriff's Department. Moss herself has been cautious about the attention. In interviews, she's emphasized that the breakthrough came from advances in DNA technology, not from brilliant detective work. She deflected credit toward the original investigators like Carl Dunbar, toward the forensic labs that developed new testing methods, toward the FBI agents who conducted the surveillance. But the public narrative is already forming: Jennifer Moss solved Laura Beckett's murder. In Ravenscroft itself, the aftermath has been complicated. The Miles family has fractured. Angela Miles filed for divorce within a week of the verdict. She's indicated that she wants to leave town, to start fresh somewhere her name isn't synonymous with murder. Their son, Jacob, withdrew from the police academy. Their daughter, Emma, has stopped attending classes at the local high school, opting instead for tutoring at home to avoid the stares and whispers. Ethan's auto shop has closed. The building sits empty now, windows dark, a "for sale" sign weathered by rain and neglect. No one wants to buy it. The property is tainted by association. Some people in Ravenscroft have expressed sympathy for Angela and the children. They argue that the family shouldn't be punished for Ethan's crimes. Others maintain that they can't separate the family from what Ethan did, that his betrayal of the town's trust implicates everyone connected to him. The town is divided in ways it may never fully heal from. Dean Beckett has given one interview since the verdict. He sat with a local news anchor and spoke quietly about Margaret, about the pain of raising a daughter only to lose her to violence, about the decades of uncertainty that preceded the arrest and conviction. "My wife spent 30 years wondering," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "She died not knowing. I'm grateful that I finally know what happened. I'm grateful that the man responsible will spend the rest of his life in prison. But I would trade all of this, the conviction, the trial, the justice, if it meant I could have my daughter back." He paused, collecting himself. Laura wanted to make the world safer. She wanted to tell stories that mattered. I hope that's how people remember her. Not as a victim, but as a young woman who cared about truth and justice, even when it was difficult. The interview has been replayed on news stations across the state. People have discussed Dean Beckett's grief in conversations at diners and living rooms and workplaces. His words capture something essential about loss and the inadequacy of justice to truly heal it. In the coming months, there will be documentaries. There will be books. There will be true crime programs devoted entirely to Laura's case. Her story will be told and retold, analyzed and discussed, until it becomes part of the broader cultural conversation about cold cases and criminal justice. But in Ravenscroft itself, the conversation is simpler. It's about the man who lived among them, who they trusted, who they now know was a killer. It's about how well you can really know anyone. It's about the importance of staying vigilant, of not assuming that kindness and normalcy are synonymous with innocence. Laura Beckett's death has changed her town in ways that will last for generations. Whether that change is ultimately for the better remains to be seen. But it's undeniable that Ravenscroft will never be the same small, quiet town it was before June 17, 1996. The silence that protected Ethan Miles for nearly 3 decades has been shattered. And in that shattering, a community has been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about itself. June 17, 1996. A date that should have marked the beginning of Laura Beckett's life. Instead, it marked the end. For 29 years, that date existed in a kind of limbo. Not forgotten exactly, but dormant. The people of Ravenscroft moved on. They had to. Life doesn't stop because one person goes missing. Children were born. Businesses opened and closed. The town changed, evolved, tried to forget. But some truths refused to stay buried. Laura's case reminds us of something we don't want to believe: evil doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't wear a mask or carry a weapon visibly. It lives next door. It coaches your child's baseball team. It fixes your car and charges you fairly. It attends church and volunteers for community events. It smiles when you pass on the street. Evil looks like Ethan Miles. And for 29 years, everyone in Ravenscroft was blind to it. This is the most terrifying aspect of Laura's story. Not that she was killed, though that's tragic beyond measure. But that the man who killed her lived openly in the community that mourned her. He was questioned and released. He built a life while her family fell apart. He raised children, earned respect, became someone people trusted with their most valued possessions. And all the while, he was a murderer. The question that haunts us now is simple: how many Ethan Miles are out there? How many killers are living ordinary lives in small towns across America? How many victims will go undiscovered because we assume the worst about the obvious suspects and overlook the trusted neighbor? Laura's case offers no comfort on these questions. It only offers a warning. The technology that solved her murder, DNA analysis, cold case task forces, investigative techniques that didn't exist in 1996, is being applied to thousands of other unsolved cases right now. Some will be solved. Others will remain mysteries. But Laura's case proves that hope is never lost, that time and technology can conspire to bring justice even when decades have passed. It also proves something else. It proves that persistence matters. Detective Carl Dunbar never stopped believing Laura's case could be solved, even though he carried it with him into retirement. Detective Jennifer Moss inherited that belief and pursued it relentlessly. When DNA technology became available, she didn't hesitate. She tested the evidence. She followed the leads. She brought a killer to justice. That's what persistence looks like. For the Beckett family, justice came too late for Margaret. She spent her final years wondering what happened to her daughter, carrying that not knowing like a stone in her chest. Dean got the answers she never did. But he would tell you, and has told you, that no conviction, no sentence, no amount of justice can bring Laura back. What justice does is acknowledge the victim's worth. It says, your life mattered. Your death wasn't meaningless. The person who took you from the world will answer for it, no matter how long it takes. That's what the Laura Beckett case is really about. It's about a young woman who cared about truth. Who was willing to risk her reputation, her relationships, maybe even her safety to expose corruption. Who believed that journalism could change the world. Who believed that the truth mattered more than loyalty to a powerful family or a failing institution. She was right to believe those things. And she paid the ultimate price for that belief. But her story is being told now. Her article is being read. Her name is being remembered. And maybe, just maybe, her death will inspire other young journalists to have the courage she had. To ask the hard questions. To pursue the uncomfortable truths. To believe that speaking up matters, even when it's dangerous. That's her legacy. As you sit with this story, as you think about Ethan Miles and what he did, as you contemplate how someone can hide such darkness for so long, remember this: Laura Beckett was real. She had dreams. She had a future. She was loved. And she was taken from the world by someone who should have been a stranger but wasn't. That's the story. That's the truth. Now, before you go, I need to say this directly: thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Thank you for caring about Laura's story, for understanding why it matters, for recognizing that cold cases deserve our attention and our respect. If this case moved you, and I believe it did, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. I know it seems simple, but every like tells YouTube that this content matters. That people care about justice. That we're not done telling the stories of victims who've been forgotten. Subscribe to Sinister Thoughts. Turn on that notification bell so you never miss another case. Because there are hundreds of cold cases out there. Hundreds of families still waiting for answers. Hundreds of victims whose stories need to be told. And I'm going to tell them. But I can only do that if you're here with me. If you're subscribed. If you're engaged. If you're sharing these stories with people you care about. Comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you think about this case. Tell me if you have a cold case in your community that deserves attention. Drop that comment. Engage. Be part of this community. And if you haven't subscribed yet, ask yourself why. Is it because you're not sure about the channel? Because you don't have time? Because you're skeptical about true crime content? Whatever it is, I want to hear it. Comment and tell me what's holding you back. Because I genuinely believe these stories matter. I believe we have a responsibility to remember victims. To keep their names alive. To demand justice long after the headlines have faded. Laura Beckett's name should never be forgotten. Ethan Miles should never be allowed to fade into obscurity. Their story should be told and retold until every person in this country understands how fragile our safety really is, how important it is to stay vigilant, how crucial it is to listen when something feels wrong. Subscribe. Share. Comment. Engage. That's how we keep Laura's memory alive. That's how we honor her courage. That's how we make sure her death wasn't meaningless. Don't also forget to turn on that notification bell. I'll see you next time.